Well, I'd love to start by talking about the power of sport. We women in sport think a lot about the power of sport, and I'd be really curious to start by exploring your experiences of sport as a mixed race girl growing up.
So, um, I loved sport right from the get-go. I was quite good at sport, or at least I thought I was when I was in my school environment. So I was, I played in pretty much every sport that was available to me, represented the school, represented my local district in a few things, but I was never going to trouble the echelons of elite sport. However, at the time, I think it felt like it was a big part of my identity to be good at sport. And what it gave me, I think at that time, I was a mixed race girl in the Midlands in a very white comprehensive school, big comprehensive school, 1,200 of us. Um, and I think what it gave me was a confidence to find my place within that place. So I drew confidence and kudos from being involved in sport, being recognized as being good at sport and having something that was my thing. I think the other thing that it gave me was a really good way of bonding with my girlfriends.
I'm really curious to hear about how your experience in sport as a young woman kind of translated into shaping the experience of your kind of career as you've gone in from the early career to today. How's it helped you?
So it's been an interesting one. So I spent the first part of my career, I wasn't involved in sport. I'm a marketing professional by trade. I spent a lot of time actually working in the arts, and within music. I spent some time working for the LSO and for the South Bank Centre, involved in arts marketing. And then made a transition when I moved into the BBC. I started off working in music radio at BBC, and then I was given an opportunity somewhere down the line to head up marketing for BBC Sport, which I just thought I died and gone to heaven when I got that job. It was something I've tried a number of times. The timing hadn't quite been right. But because I love sport, I'm an avid spectator of sport. I love everything about the participation angle of it. So getting involved in BBC Sport professionally was really important to me, and a huge high point of my career. I think one of the things that I then had to really work on when I first got there was the sport world was incredibly male, is incredibly male dominated. And I think more so, this was 20 years ago, there were even less women involved in sport at that point from an administrative perspective. And I got used very quickly to being the only woman in the room. And coming from a marketing background within some areas of sport and not having the kudos of being an ex-elite athlete, whereby my involvement in sport was obvious, I had to do a lot of work in building relationships and building my own credibility in my own professional discipline, which came as a bit of a shock. I had to do that work, and a lot of it was based around building relationships that were founded on my credibility coming with my knowledge of sport, even though I wasn't necessarily an expert in it. I had to prove to the people that I was working in and around that I could at least speak the language, and I had the same level of understanding of passion for something that these guys, and they were predominantly guys, had dedicated their lives to, or at least their professional lives to. So that was something where I really had to think about how I built those relationships. And a lot of the time I did actually fall back on that thing that I was saying right at the beginning of finding common ground that I could talk about that gave people around me confidence that I had that love of sport, I had a passion for it, and then they would listen to me professionally. And that was a really interesting time, I think.
So I'm curious to just get a sense of what you feel are the main sort of challenges for women entering the sector today.
We've still got work to do about stereotyping, I think, about what both women and people of colour are likely to be good at within the sport industry, and really debunking some of those myths. I think we have, it's a challenging industry in which to be working if you have got challenges from a flexibility perspective, just because of the nature of what we do. But I think also some real progressive thinking about what flexible working can look like going forward. And I think that is a real challenge. And it does fall on women many times, that their careers are limited by a lack of flexibility, I think, within workplaces. Now, we are all a hell of a lot further forward than we were 6 months ago in terms of our thinking around what is possible remotely. And I think the joys of Zoom and Teams and all of the other platforms that we are now working with on a daily basis and have become a common business tool, which they really weren't 6 months ago, I think helps us hugely to free our minds as to what flexibility actually looks like in the workplace now, and to think progressively about what it is that we need our people to be doing and where they need to be in order to do that. So I think that's a huge thing. I think there are some things around the system has maybe has not adapted as it needs to embrace diversity and people of colour in the way that we now understand it needs to. I think when we were speaking before, again, you know, I don't feel like I've been on the receiving end of overtly racist behaviour. Maybe I'm just really thick-skinned, or I don't know why, if it's there, and I do believe that it is, then I haven't felt that particularly. But I am looking at a system which is not reflecting the communities that it serves and the communities of this country in the right way, and therefore I think we've got to do something to change that. What I would say is, I think that of late there has been a much more universal understanding that that is the case, and that there is a real I think what's the word I'm looking for, that there's real enthusiasm from our industry to embrace diversity in all its forms in a way that I haven't probably seen before. Because I think previous to this, it's been around the excluded group, and the focus has been on them to make a change. And quite clearly, that isn't the thing that is going to change the mainstream. I think what we're seeing now is many more people being positive and open to that change coming, and working together as an industry to provoke change. I think we can quite safely say that we're at the beginning of a journey, not at the end of it, but there are many ideas and many organisations that I haven't seen before who are really embracing the need for change and positively out there looking for the means of making that change. And I think that is a really great place to start, but it is a lot of work, and it will be hugely challenging to see practical change result in the dial moving, I think, in the next coming months and years.
And that's a great array of things for people to start thinking about in terms of areas of challenge and opportunities to create change. And you know what I hear in that is it's great that there is a positivity and an openness to transform, because there is an element of transformation in this. And it sounds like it's at that kind of cultural level of thinking about how we can look at the way we do things differently, and to kind of really interrogate where they might be holding people back. And that, you know, it's encouraging to hear that your experience has not been affected by the more sort of overt discrimination. But what we do know is that, you know, certainly from the work I've been doing with women in sport, that there is this kind of structural layer that is a little bit invisible to see, and you can't always be sure that's what's happening to you, but somehow your progression isn't as quick as a woman of colour, or you're not given the same opportunities as a woman of colour, and that's why it sort of stays where it is. So I think being open to exploring all of that feels important too.
I think that seems to me to be absolutely right. I suppose from a personal perspective, I couldn't put my finger on the points in my career where that may have happened. I might have got a sense of something. But, you know, by definition, it's really difficult to pin down. And I think the only way that you address that is by opening up those structures and systems and organizations to real scrutiny and new thinking as to how they can be better, and engaging the leadership and the whole of the workforce of those organizations, so that you do get a groundswell of change. I believe passionately that actually we should, all of our organisations, whether they be in the private sector, the public sector, whoever they might be, ought to be more representative through the whole of the hierarchy of the society that we now are. And I think from that representation, and from having people with different thinking, you get better results, but you also get an increase in the pace of change and the momentum that can build up through having small fires lit throughout the whole of those organizations, and things start to move. So I think that is an important thing, and that for me is one of the reasons why I feel so passionately about finding practical ways to increase representation, be it of women, or be it of people of colour, or be it of other underrepresented groups, so that their thinking then starts to influence the thinking of these big or small institutions.
And what do you think is the role of leadership in creating those small fires?
I think it's absolutely intrinsic, because if you have a leader that isn't interested in that change, then that permeates through an organization. Or you have a leader, or you have leadership. I mean, creating a safe space for people to do things differently, and to try things that maybe haven't been done before, which may or may not succeed, but have the intent of broadening the diversity in an organization, and opening up the inclusivity of the culture that they work in, because leadership does have an influence on the culture of an organization. They're not the custodian of it, and they don't own it, but they certainly have a big influence on how an organization comports itself. And I think that's where leadership can be really important, in giving encouragement, in modeling behavior, in giving people a permission to try new stuff. And I think that's really important from a leadership perspective.
I really love that you know, the positivity that you feel in the power of sports organisations already intrinsically having all of the qualities to kind of create transformation and change, because of who they are and because of the hurdles they've overcome in the past. And it's just thinking about this particular challenge in a new way that unlocks and frees them from having to get it right the first time. You know, there's some degree of experimentation with this, just to see what works and learn, and kind of go forward from there, and not be kind of worrying about failing in some way.
Yes, I think that's important. I mean, I think it's also important to say that there is expertise out there outside of the industry that we probably need to bring into the sector to be able to learn from other people who have done it, other countries that have done it, and that have expertise that we can learn from. I mean, listening to communities in this country is absolutely the first thing that we need to do. But actually there is expertise in other areas that we can utilise and we can learn from. So I'm not saying that we've got everything that we need currently within the sector, because I don't believe that's right. But I do think that we have the bones of what that can be, and the thinking and the resilience and the tenacity and all of those things that have helped us as a sector to become a really world-leading sport industry.
Thank you so much, Tove. It's been really, really useful and informative and inspiring listening to your different perspectives on this, on what we're trying to shift in the world of sport towards a more inclusive, diverse sector. I just want to say a big thank you for giving us your time today and sharing your wonderful insights.
Oh, thank you, Letesia. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Oh, my pleasure.